So it's an absolute excitement, pleasure, honour that I introduce you to Kevin Bennett. But let me just introduce you first. I'll just let you know what he does. Because he is, I actually call him Kevin the Brain Bennett. So Kevin is a mental and emotional strategist, and he has helped empower over 1.2 million people globally since 2010 via seminars, workshops at universities, schools, you name it, podcast, TV, he's done it. Okay, so this question is such a huge question, as I said, that only Kevin the Brain Bennett can answer. So without further ado, Kevin, welcome to Owning It with Iola.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say thank you as well for all of your years of support. You've supported me over the years, and I truly, truly appreciate all what you've done. So I guess in that sense, the conversation is that we are all our helplines in one form or another.
Okay.
Because we all need someone to turn to, and you're one of those people throughout time.
Yes.
You've always supported my journey as well. So likewise, thank you very much.
Oh wow! Oh look at that! I wasn't expecting that. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. But likewise, Kevin's been there on the phone. For many people, including myself, as well as professionally. So, Kevin, let's just start at the beginning because this month, June, is Men's Mental Health Month. Now, I didn't even know there was such a thing as Men's Mental Health Month. I shouldn't say. I did know there's such a thing as men's mental health, but not Men's Mental Health Month, the awareness of it. And I think it's something that's definitely needed for various reasons, but we'll get into that in a second. But first, I just want to start off with you sharing a bit about your personal story. I know it's a huge story within itself, but just kind of one aspect you can just draw on, talking about your personal journey with mental health, trauma, and what has helped you.
Yeah, sure. I talk about it quite a bit in my book, to be honest. I grew up originally in Brixton, Stocker Park Estate, 80s, 90s, and that particular time, there was so much trauma, and I didn't realise that we were all constituents of generational trauma. Different cultures coming together that were suffering their own journeys of trauma from all around the world, from the Caribbean to African countries to throughout Europe as well. And then when you're all accumulated into one estate block, you don't realise that you're all bringing different things to the pot. So when you're living underneath, on top of, and beside traumatized people, internal trauma starts to sometimes progress into external trauma, and so and external aggression. So over time, I've been stabbed 4 different times in my life. My brother's been murdered, shot and killed. I've had a nephew that hung himself. I've had a child that died. I've had numerous friends being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So I've seen so much, and obviously there's been a lot of killings and so on and so forth. And so over time, we do tend to accumulate so much data on trauma, and we've all experienced some form of trauma, even developmental trauma between the ages of 0 to 6 years old. I didn't realise growing up that so many of my friends, it's only with a more of an educated mind as you grow up and you look back, that they were suffering trauma in the house. For some it was physical abuse, for others it was sexual abuse. And so it led me down my path to really understand what trauma is about, and my mission to help people that are going through trauma, who are suffering in silence fundamentally. That's where most people suffer, is because they suffer in silence, either culturally, sometimes the bureaucracy of governments as well. So I talk about in my book the fact that doctors, for example, in certain countries, they can't express themselves, so they can lose their license. So there are many different reasons why people are suffering in silence, which then morphs into mental health problems, psychosis, bipolar, manic depression, so many different types of depression and disorders, etc. And so it's been my mission, I would say, since 2010 to help people to really get to express themselves, also share what's going on. And
what drew you to that? What drew you to that particular?
One of the main things is my mother, when she came into England, it was that time of no dogs, no blacks, no Irish, etc. And my mother was an auxiliary nurse at She was also a nurse at Moseley Hospital.
Mm.
And so I've seen my mum over the years being supportive and helping people. But parallel to that, who was supporting my mum? She brought up six of us, and we weren't the best of children at the best of times, with our behaviour. And then my sister, before she died, she had postpartum depression. And so my mum adopted four of her children on top of it. So it was that conversation, who's helping my mother when my mother needed help.
Yeah.
And so I recognized that from a young age. I didn't title it that way, but I did recognize how much she was really struggling and suffering as well. But she came through. And then, obviously the untimely deaths of three of my siblings, I watched my mother go through that and still remain strong. And sometimes we see strength and we high five strength, but sometimes that strength is a part of survival, and sometimes that strength disconnects the relationship as well. So it's that's where I believe it started, is really observing my surroundings and seeing those people around me struggle.
So how did you make that transition? Because I know that you're somebody who's very well read. Is it something that you had to train in, or did you sort of, from experiences, what did you draw on to kind of get to where you now have made this book? And this is not just a book. Like, I'm actually surprised to see that this is such a dense book. Actually, not surprised, but I didn't think it was going to be as thick. But how long?
500 pages.
Do you know what? Only Kevin the Brain that just walks in like, yeah, I just written a book, in a year and a half, and I know that's a momentous achievement to actually write a book in itself. So congratulations. But it looks like such a dense book, and I know that you are so well read, so thorough. So I know that you've read many books over the years, but in terms of your emotional and mental strategist, how did you kind of start doing that work in terms of helping people?
I always advise people. So from a young age, I've had a minimum 25 mentors in all different areas, from spirituality to psychology to business to lifestyle, etc. I've travelled. So when I went on my journey of understanding human behaviour, I travelled to over 25 countries just studying human behaviour.
Wow.
I've read.
Don't do anything by halves, do we, Kevin? Not by halves. Love it.
I read. I was ferocious when it comes to studying people, and I started studying animal behaviour I was inspired by a doctor named Dr. Pansat. He discovered emotions in rats. And so I started to study how rats have emotions, etc. And we discovered that rats have similar emotions to human beings. And so that's where they discovered the 7 brain systems that we have as human beings. So when we're going through different emotions, there are 7 systems that we're governed by. And so that led me down the path, and I started to study people like David D. Burns, who wrote one of the first powerful self-help books called Feeling Good. And so I was just reading, and I started to work with people. I went back into the community. I was working with literally hundreds of people throughout time, just kept on working to it turn into thousands overall. And then I discovered something that really made me interested in studying human behaviour. And what I discovered is that different occupations vibrate in different frequencies. And that's when it really captured me. So every single occupation has a vibration frequency.
Right, so what is I know that you've got a list here. Should we go through the list?
Sure.
Listeners, listen carefully. Also, you guys that are listening live from the socials. I don't know if you just heard what Kevin said, but this is quite serious, as it pertains to our occupation. Because if you think about it, we spend most of our lives at our jobs within our fields, and so Kevin's drawn up this list, which is included in his book, of the different occupations that are highly affected by stress. I believe it is. So you've got stress by occupation.
Yeah, so we've got stress by occupation, we've got depression by occupation, we've got suicide by occupation. So these are stats, statistics, etc. that were drawn up by the CDC and the NHS and other.
Can you tell us a few of those? So people listening, I don't know if you are in a high stress or high depression occupation. So if you want to share it.
Sure. So you have occupations that are high stress. So, for example, firefighters, physicians, airline pilots, police officers, event managers, taxi drivers,
Really?
construction workers, yeah, massive, pharmacists, financial analysis, sales managers, mental health counsellors, etc. They have, police officers. They have very high, and this is very, very important as well. And I get to why the importance of it. Very high stress rates. Then you have occupation with high depression rate, and nurses have very high depression rate because of occupation. Nursing home workers, social workers, healthcare workers, artists, entertainers, writers, teachers, very high depression rate. Administrative support staff, maintenance workers, financial advisors, salespeople, food staff, very, very high depression rate. Construction workers, childcare workers. Then you have occupation by suicide, and so these are like, they're more than likely to have 10 times the likelihood of suicide than the general public just because of their occupation alone.
Right.
So surgeons, very high suicide rates. Dentists, police officers, veterinarians, financial services, real estate agents, very high suicide rates. Electricians, lawyers, doctors, farmers extremely, extremely high. It's
That one threw me a little bit, to be honest with you.
Farmers.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, okay, from the list that you've read, especially when it comes to the suicide, it seems to be more so with regards to what I can see the commonality or the pattern is risk, danger, their propensities for that, not propensity, but, exposure to those things. But farmers?
Yeah, let me explain a bit about farmers. So in India alone, 24 farmers per day commit suicide. Every single day, 24 farmers commit suicide in India alone. But all over the world, farmers are committing suicide at a very high rate, and that's based on the reasons why. Some of it is that they have generational expectations, and so they have to look after a farm so by themselves a lot of the time. So they're isolated in their own environment, no one's to talk to, and they've got to look after a farm that is generations passed down. Then they've got to deal with pesticides. They've got to deal with climate change. So there's times that their crops won't grow. Then they've got to deal with machinery, etc. They've got to deal with late nights and isolation. They've got to deal with, and if their crops don't work, they're finished for the whole year, the whole season. And then they've got to deal with the finances side. They don't actually make much money. So then what happens on top of it? They start to get loan sharks that will come in, and then they'll put a lien against their farms, etc. And so there's so much pressure that's on them, suffering in silence, living in silence. And if you really want to be in a dark place, isolation is the way forward. And so when crops are not working, when they have breakdowns within their family, when they're isolated, when they owe money, and when they've got the pressure of their, as I said, their generations, they may have a farm in their family for 100 or 200 years or so. All of those pressures, farmers just give up after a period of time. They just can't see, and they have no concept of reality. According to, we live in London and we have that communication, but a lot of farmers live in isolated rural areas. So they don't have no sense of socialization the way that we do as well, which is a massive part of mammals needing to socialize.
Right. But I mean, with the other ones, let's talk about stress, for example. I mean, stress is something that we all deal with.
Yeah.
We a lot of us know a lot of nurses and, physicians and people that work within the food service, sales managers, things like that, that you've had on your list of both stress and depression. And I mean, it's really quite scary to see that actually, that, that these people are suffering from, especially the suicide one, because it's one of those subjects that's not really spoken about, particularly in the Black community. It's a bit of a taboo, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
My previous guest, Maurice, who I also mentioned in the book too, he came near with it. He had suicidal thoughts. And I wanted to ask you, being that it is men's mental health, you are a man, do you think that there's a greater sort of propensity for men to suffer from mental health, or was it just that they're not as open about it, so maybe they're suppressing their emotions?
Yeah, I mean, a massive part of mental health is not sharing and expressing what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons why, and I'm really passionate about this, funny enough, one of the reasons why men really suffer when it comes to expressing themselves, because we learn very quickly that when we express ourselves emotionally, we turn into memes. And so when you look at, for example, when Tyrese started to, when Tyrese had his breakdown, he's now a meme forever and ever. Amen. He's now a meme. I remember, and I talk about this quite a bit because once again I'm really passionate about this. But if you remember, there was a young man about 9 or 10 years ago now who made a mistake. He, outside of a club.
And I don't know why I'm smiling.
Yeah.
See, that's really bad because it was made into such a. I even know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
And you said he made a mistake, and now I'm like, okay.
Yeah, he made a mistake and he performed an act with his partner. And someone filmed it, and now every single year they have a day for him. And so it's around New Year's, his picture comes up, they laugh at him again, he becomes the joke and all the rest of it. What people don't know on the other side is that every single year he goes through that trauma over and over again. Every single year, he probably got broken relationships because of it. Maybe his children doesn't respect him. Maybe his family doesn't look at him the same way. But every single year, he's definitely going to have some form of anxiety because the whole world of that community comes together and the pictures get shared and they actually call it sent. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to promote it anymore, but they call it sent yada yada yada.
Wow. And I didn't know that actually.
Yeah, and so it's been going on every single year for the last probably 7 to 10 years. I can't remember what year it was. And the reason why I say this is because men learn very quickly not to express themselves emotionally in public because we learn that we end up becoming the butt of everyone's joke. Where if a woman tends to have a breakdown in public, people rally around and say, don't worry, it's going to be okay. But when men have breakdowns, we become mean, especially black men more than any other.
Have you heard from that said gentleman? Have you heard anything from him?
I looked into some things, and once again, it was really sad. He was on the tube one day, and someone started filming him, saying, you're that guy, and he was like, just leave me alone, I can't take it no more, kind of thing. Wow. So every time I've seen clips of him since that date, it was someone filming him, laughing at him, and harassing him, etc. So this is how easy it is for us to make emotional decisions in public. And when I said it could be as drastic as what he done, or as minor as Tyrese or other men, especially black men, becoming emotional in public, and then he becomes a meme. And so we learn very quickly as men not to share our emotions, and that makes us suffer in silence.
Right. So what can we do, especially as the women in these men's lives and our men's lives? What can we do to encourage, support that opening up, that sharing? Because you said the biggest problem is sharing.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost is trust. We as men, we don't want things thrown back in our face in the moment of an argument or a disagreement.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And that happens quite a lot, to be honest, where women will turn around and say, in moments to be hurtful and spiteful, they will say things that hurt. And so it's first and foremost is to provide a space where men can express themselves without feeling like they're going to be there's going to be a revenge of some type down the line when there's a disagreement. So trust is number one. Number two is to give them the understanding that they are a human being, because once again, that the conversation of masculinity, which is a very prominent and very good conversation, but sometimes people misconstrue what masculinity actually means. And so in the skies of masculinity, men once again hide their emotions because they feel like they are not being masculine when they're expressing their emotions. And so it's having a good conversation of what is masculinity and what is a natural human being thing to do, which is if you need to cry, you need to cry. If you need to express, you need to express.
And teaching them from young.
Yes, and teaching them that
teaching them from when they're boys before they become men.
Yeah, I believe in the household you need to create a new culture. Don't try to change the culture outside if the culture in the inside is not. So when you get into a relationship or raising children, you have to create a culture within the house that allows everyone in the house to express themselves. Where don't make not the lack of expression yourself be the reason of your mental and emotional traumas. Make it be other things and then work on it.
The issue with that, though, when you say culture, and I know culture is not just about, I'm from Jamaica, whatever, it's the culture that you create, the behaviours and patterns, right?
Sure.
The issue with that is that obviously there's a lineage of your parents did it this way, so then maybe you've picked up some habits and you've learnt some traits that you then teach to your children, i.e., to be masculine means, my mum used to say something like, raise your balls. And it took me to adulthood, and I'm like, hang on a minute, but weird. I'm actually a girl. I'm a woman. I don't actually have balls. So, I know it's just a colloquialism and expression, but it's quite a serious one in terms of, man up. It's that kind of man up. And it was always used in the sort of situation where I was deemed as being emotional or too sensitive. And it took me a little while till later on. It's like, yeah, well, I am sensitive, and that's okay. I can only imagine it for a young boy, and we briefly touched on this last week as well. Growing up culturally in an area or society or community where that idea of masculinity, femininity, or what's right for a man to express or what's right for a boy to express is kind of suppressed, so that you can't actually even be human. Like, to be human is to feel. But then we're taught from our parents, our elders, whoever, women act like this or girls act like this and boys act like that.
Well, that's a very good point. It's a very good question as well. I honestly believe that we need to, if we're going to progress as from a cultural perspective, we have to unlearn certain things. And I'll tell you the reason why I say that. I remember probably about 4 or 5 years ago now, I done some due diligence on history of slavery, etc. And I realized when my parents used to beat me,